And the twin video to biggest surprises of the year is, of course, biggest disappointments. Yes, I'm going to be listening off some of my biggest disappointing albums of the year. Unfortunately, that happens every year where you have different albums that you have really huge expectations for. Sometimes they just don't land. Sometimes they end up going in the other direction with the fact that they can just end up being really bad as opposed to just not meeting your expectations, which is really, really not good. And I'll talk about some of those in the video. But of course, it's all subjective. You might have one of these albums on your year-end list. I'm pretty sure at least one of these is on a lot of people's lists. But for me, it's a disappointment. For you, it's great, and that's okay. Few mentions before I get into the actual 5 albums. No order or anything like that, just 5 albums. But I do want to mention a few that were disappointments, but not really that big to the point where I'm like, you know, completely wrecked over it. The Flu mixtape, I don't know, man. This just did not hit, really. Some tracks were great, but like the whole thing, I was just kind of left out in the cold with. But you know, what can I say? Some people saying it's one of the best electronic albums of the year. Beating SCJ, you know, SCJ? Escapism? Did you listen to that, man? Come on. Clipping as well. Can't really say this was a huge disappointment because honestly, not the biggest fan of Clipping these days, even though I do recognise a lot of great songs in their catalogue. And their last album didn't really hit me like it hit a lot of other people, so I thought this album wasn't going to be that great either. And yeah, for me, it didn't really hit. I thought David's storytelling generally was fantastic. He's still one of the best rappers around. I would never take that away from him. And they're still creative with their production style and how they just build these concepts with every release. Like, it's just... it's so damn frustrating. Like, everything about them should be amazing to my ears. It's just not. I don't know why. I cannot explain it. It's ridiculous. So yeah, it's pretty disappointed. And the last one I'll mention is Malibu Ken. Just, you know, A$AP Rock. Thought I'd get a bit more out of this album. It was pretty solid, to be fair. I did give it a positive review. But this combination of like Tobacco and A$AP Rock sounded really, really brilliant, and it just didn't really turn out that way. Now for the actual list, starting with Flying Lotus. I think this was a big disappointment for everyone. I remember when people responded to this album initially, there were some people that were just so hesitant about the album. Like, they weren't really daring to say that they didn't like it, even though you could tell that people weren't really liking it. And then as like time went on, I think people just collectively realized that, yeah, this album was not it. Not only is it just ridiculously long, like I don't think it needed to be as long as it was, but the tracks themselves just like didn't feel like his best work. For me, his best work is Los Angeles, if I'm being completely honest. Obviously, he has other really good albums as well, with Cosmogrammer, but you know, they just felt fully developed, and they felt like they were, especially Cosmogrammer in its like, you know, sound, like there is just a very specific sound, and this new one just kind of got lost with some of the features and stuff. It sort of opened up my eyes a little bit, and I went back to some of his other albums, and I've got to say it did really put into perspective some of the issues that are on this one that kind of were always there before. And that's not really the biggest disappointment anyway. It's just the fact that this is by far his worst album, and it just did not live up to my expectations. But not to say that his previous work is like terrible or anything now, because it's not. But yeah, I just think there's something about his sound that's just not quite right, and he's not really living up to his fullest potential, especially on an album like this. Marina next, formerly known as Marina and the Diamonds. She dropped the Diamonds and dropped her worst album by far. Yeah, this was... it's like the blandest pop shit, man. Like, what happened here? To be fair, the singles leading up to this were pretty shaky. They were pretty shaky. I was kind of worried. But there was at least that one great song, Handmade Heaven, that I kind of thought maybe this could be a lot better than I'm expecting, but it wasn't. It was just this ridiculously loose concept with like love and fear, you know, the 8 songs being about love and then fear songs. It was like the most basic concept you could ever think of, and then even that was wrong, because I remember there were 2 songs on both like sections that should have been on the opposite ones. Like one of them felt more like a love song and it was on Fear, and one of them felt like a fear song and it was on. It was just like, why is this? What's she doing? Just such a fall from grace. Her debut is not talked about enough amongst music nerds. I think if you're talking about like, I guess, melodrama and emotion as like your pop albums of the decade, and you're not bringing up the family jewels, I think you're doing a huge disservice to the album, because it really is deserving of being in the conversation. So to go from that to an album here that was just pretty bad is a big disappointment. Next, I'm going to go with SleaterKinney's album, which was produced by Saint Vincent of all people, which just got me hyped on name alone, and it ended up being the worst album SleaterKinney have ever released. So bad that the drummer left. The drummer left. She just went, nah, man, this isn't what we want to be doing. So she just left. It's mental. It's actually mental. Like, this was a band that was so tight for years, and because of the direction that they took, she left. Just not a good sign from the get-go, is it? To really lose your drummer because of the direction that you're taking. And, it's such a shame. Like, I thought St. Vincent wouldn't suck the energy out of their sound, and she kind of did. Like, the production is really the worst part about this album. But I guess SleaterKinney didn't really like come back with a bang, because that album that they dropped in 2015, I think it was just pretty good. It was definitely one of their lower tier albums anyway, so I suppose this album wasn't like the biggest disappointment in the world, but I think for the expectations of the band, this is pretty low. Next, Alex Cameron with Miami Memory. Yeah, man, I just love Force Witness. I talk about it a lot, just generally, like, I just find it to be such an entertaining album. Alex Cameron on there is just such a good performer. The music is obviously very much inspired from the era that it is. Like, it wears its influences on its sleeves, clearly. But when the music sounds as good as it does, and you've got a performer who is putting on this character that's so funny, you just ignore all that, because it just all comes together in a way that you just can't not love. But this album, man, this was not good. I didn't see like any Alex Cameron fans like talk about this. So weird how it just kind of just left the radar of music people like immediately. I don't know, maybe he wasn't as popular as I thought, but I just thought there was an audience for Force Witness, and this one just flew by. And kind of deserved it, if I'm being completely honest. There are people out there that probably like this, that's fine. But, the comedy wasn't there. It felt forced, actually, sometimes. The music really wasn't there either. Some of the mixing, was really off. I remember the first track just sounding like a mess. And it just wasn't really, it wasn't really there. Humour is difficult to replicate, I must say, so, the pressure was on him to kind of live up to that type of comedy again, but he didn't really need to be hilarious the second time round. He just needed to make good songs, and that I don't think this album had good songs. In fact, Holiday Sidewinder, who tours regularly, was on this album, dropped a much better album than he did this year, so at least check her out if you're not familiar with her. And if you were disappointed with this one, because you'll get something out of that one for sure. And to end off this list, gotta go with Angel Olsen, Old Mirrors. Yeah, this was a huge bummer, actually. I really remember forcing myself to find things to like about it. It was really sad to get an album like this. I loved the two singles she dropped before. They're some of her best songs, Lock, and then the title track. Well, no, they came out in the other way around, but they're some of her best songs. And then she had this really grand and expansive music all across the album. The strings, everything just sounded so on point, but her voice just was taking a back seat the whole way through. The album was just begging for a more expressive vocalist, and she proved she could be an expressive vocalist on her previous material and on the first two tracks of that very album, but the rest of it, I don't know what went wrong. I just didn't get gripped by hardly any of it. All Mirrors is still one of the best songs of the year, without a doubt. I will not be changing my mind on that, but this album didn't really do it at all. But again, all my opinion, you might not feel this way. You might actually love some of these albums, and if you do, I want to hear why. That's all good and dandy. Please let me know in the comments what you think of these albums. What are your biggest disappointments of the year? Let me know, I'd love to hear them. Of course, as always, there'll be some that you think of that hit for you in a different way than it did for me. Like, you might have been a huge fan of Mac DeMarco, and you know, he dropped an album that no one liked, but for me, I wasn't really a fan of Mac DeMarco anyway. So I was just like, yeah, business as usual, he's dropping duds. And lots of other examples too. Just let me know in the comments what you think. Do have a good day. Subscribe, please, if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments. Have a good day.